The spring sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, casting golden patterns over the stack of legal documents on my desk. 3 weeks until my wedding, and my world should have been filled with excitement, cake tastings, final dress fittings, and honeymoon plans with Gavin Holt, the man I had promised to spend my life with. Instead, I was staring at my phone, scrolling through a series of bank notifications I didn't recognize. Small, unfamiliar transactions. $21.99. $43.50. $89.99. Individually, they were insignificant. Coffee runs, late-night gas station purchases, maybe an online subscription or two. The kind of financial clutter most people ignored. But I wasn't most people. I was a real estate attorney. I specialized in contracts, hidden clauses, and financial loopholes. These transactions weren't random. They were testing limits, laying the groundwork for something bigger. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe Gavin had picked up a new gym membership or had been ordering something online he hadn't mentioned. I nearly put my phone down and pushed it to the back of my mind, but something about the pattern gnawed at me. These weren't Gavin's usual charges. He had a very specific routine, a predictable way of spending money. If he was going to be careless, it wouldn't be in such small, scattered amounts. Frowning, I pulled up our shared financial accounts. As much as I trusted Gavin, I had always maintained a separate personal savings account, one he didn't have access to. But we had combined checking and a joint investment portfolio, one that I had meticulously organized over the years. Gavin had always been more than happy to let me handle the details. "You're the expert, Alice," he would say with that easy smile of his. "I trust you." Trust. The word suddenly felt hollow. I scrolled deeper, checking recent statements. Then, my breath hitched. A withdrawal of $25,000. It had been transferred to an external account. One I didn't recognize. A strange sensation settled in my chest, something between fear and fury. I forced myself to breathe, to focus. There had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a financial move Gavin had forgotten to mention, something for the wedding or our new home. I could ask him when he got home tonight. But something in me already knew I wouldn't like the answer. Just as I was about to close out of the banking app, a notification popped up on my screen. It was from a real estate alert I had set up years ago, a habit I had never bothered to turn off. I almost ignored it until I saw the listing. Victorian Estate in Chestnut Hill. I clicked on the link, my stomach twisting in a way that made me feel physically ill. The house was unmistakable. My childhood home. The one my grandmother had left me in her will. The place that had shaped me, comforted me, sheltered me through every milestone of my life. And it was for sale. I scrolled through the listing, my pulse pounding. There were fresh pictures of the house, its familiar white-trimmed porch and ivy-covered brick exterior looking just as they had the last time I visited. The asking price was insultingly low, almost as if someone was rushing the sale before anyone could ask too many questions. I gripped my phone, my nails digging into my palm. This wasn't possible. I owned this house. It wasn't just an inheritance. It was something I had fought for, something I had refused to let go of even when financial advisors told me it wasn't practical to hold on to it. And Gavin knew that. He had promised me he would never touch it. Yet somehow, the documents for its sale had already been signed. The world around me blurred for a moment as I struggled to process what I was seeing. My office, once a space of order and control, now felt suffocating. I needed answers. I shoved my phone into my purse, grabbed my keys, and strode out of my office, barely registering my assistant calling after me. The elevator ride down to the parking garage felt endless, the fluorescent lights overhead casting a dull glow that only sharpened the anger rising inside me. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, willing myself to think logically. Storming home and confronting Gavin without proof wouldn't help. I needed to be sure before I said anything. I pulled my phone out again and scrolled to a contact I hadn't called in over a year. Noah Harris, a private investigator. My closest friend before Gavin came into my life. Someone I had relied on for years before love had pulled me in another direction. Noah answered on the second ring, his voice casual but alert. Alice, didn't expect to hear from you. I need your help, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. It's important. There was a pause. Then, tell me everything. I inhaled deeply, glancing at the listing one last time before speaking. I think my fiancé is stealing from me. Noah didn't ask questions. He simply said, where do you want to meet? An hour later, I sat across from Noah in a dimly lit bar, my untouched drink sweating onto a napkin. He looked almost exactly the same, dark hair slightly tousled, a 5 o'clock shadow softening the sharp edges of his jaw. But there was something different in his expression as he studied me, something unreadable. You're sure about this? He asked after I finished explaining. I nodded. I need to know what's going on before I confront him. If I'm wrong, then fine. But if I'm right. Noah exhaled, running a hand through his hair. If you're right, Gavin's not just a liar. He's a criminal. The words hit me harder than I expected. I had spent years defending people in court, breaking down fraudulent contracts, exposing manipulative loopholes. But I never thought I'd be on the other side of one. What do you need from me? I asked. Access to anything financial. His emails, his accounts, anything that might show where that money went. I hesitated. Gavin had always been careful with his digital footprint, but he wasn't as cautious as he thought. I had seen his passwords before, glimpsed them over his shoulder when he logged in to pay bills. It wouldn't be hard to check. I can get it. Noah studied me for a long moment, then nodded. I'll start digging. But Alice, if he's doing this, he's not working alone. Real estate fraud on the scale isn't a one-man job. I swallowed hard, pushing down the sick feeling in my stomach. I had spent years preparing contracts, finding the flaws in other people's deals, making sure my clients didn't get cheated. Now, I was about to dismantle one of my own. And Gavin had no idea what was coming. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the listing for my grandmother's house, saw the documents with signatures that shouldn't have existed. Gavin slept soundly beside me, unaware that I had spent the last hour staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. Every now and then, he would shift in his sleep, one arm draping lazily over my waist like nothing had changed, like we were still the same couple planning our perfect wedding. But something had changed. And there was no going back. At dawn, I slipped out of bed carefully, making sure not to wake him. The air in our bedroom felt heavier than usual, thick with the weight of unspoken truths. I padded to the bathroom and locked the door behind me, heart pounding. My laptop was waiting on the vanity, exactly where I had left it the night before. I had spent years watching people make mistakes with their assets, trusting the wrong person, failing to protect what was theirs. I had built my entire career on making sure no one could take advantage of my clients. Now, I had to do the same for myself. I pulled up Gavin's email first. The password I had once casually noticed, our anniversary date followed by his childhood dog's name, worked on the first try. He had never been great at digital security. The inbox was cluttered with work emails, wedding-related confirmations, and the occasional discount code from stores we had shopped at. But then, there it was. An email thread buried under travel reservations. The subject line read, Chestnut Hill Transfer Documents. I clicked on it, my pulse hammering. The conversation stretched back weeks. Gavin and someone named Owen King discussing contracts, signatures, timelines. Owen King. I knew that name. A real estate developer, infamous for buying historic properties, gutting them, and turning them into overpriced luxury condos. His name had come up in multiple fraud cases, though nothing had ever stuck to him. And now he had my house. The emails confirmed what I already suspected but hadn't been able to accept. Gavin had forged my signature. He had taken my property, the house I had sworn to protect, and tried to sell it out from under me. A newer email caught my attention. Payment expected in full upon finalization. Attached was a bank account number. Offshore. I gripped the edge of the sink, nausea rolling through me. This wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't an accident. Gavin had planned this. He had taken steps to cover his tracks, rerouting money, ensuring that I wouldn't find out until it was too late. I forced myself to breathe. I wasn't too late. Not yet. But I had to move fast. I copied every file, every email, every attachment onto a flash drive. My hands were steady as I worked, even as my chest burned with fury. This was what Gavin had been doing while pretending to plan a life with me. He had never seen me as a partner. I had been a means to an end. I shut the laptop and pressed my palms against the cool countertop, staring at my reflection in the mirror. I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. She looked composed, but beneath the surface, there was something sharper, colder. This wasn't heartbreak. This was war. By the time I left the bathroom, Gavin was stirring. He blinked at me sleepily, his smile easy, natural. "Morning," he murmured, stretching. "Why are you up so early?" I swallowed back the bile rising in my throat. "Couldn't sleep," I said lightly, slipping the flash drive into my purse. "Wetting nerves." He grinned, propping himself up on one elbow. "We're almost there, baby. 3 more weeks." I forced a smile, nodding. 3 weeks. If he thought I was going to stand at the altar and say I do while he dismantled my life behind my back, he was even dumber than I thought. I moved through the morning on autopilot, pouring coffee, making conversation, pretending everything was normal. Gavin kissed me goodbye before leaving for work, and I let him, my skin crawling the moment his lips touched mine. As soon as I heard his car pull out of the driveway, I grabbed my purse and headed out. Noah was waiting for me at a small coffee shop on the other side of town. He had already claimed a corner booth, a laptop open in front of him. When he looked up and saw my expression, his face darkened. "You found something." I slid into the seat across from him, pulling out the flash drive. "More than something." He took the drive without hesitation, plugging it into his computer. The screen reflected in his glasses as he scrolled through the files, his expression shifting from curiosity to anger. "Jesus, Alice," he muttered, clicking through the documents. "This isn't just fraud. This is high-level real estate crime." Forged documents, offshore accounts, he knew exactly what he was doing. I folded my hands on the table, my nails pressing into my palms. "Can we stop it?" Noah exhaled sharply, his fingers tapping against the keyboard. "The sale isn't finalized yet. The transfer is in process, but it hasn't been recorded with the county. That gives us a window." "How big of a window?" "A week. Maybe less." He looked up at me, his expression unreadable. "We need to act now." I nodded, already thinking through my options. I had legal expertise. I had connections. But I needed to be smart about this. If I made the wrong move, Gavin would see me coming. Noah studied me for a long moment. "Alice, what do you want to do?" I met his gaze. Make him regret ever thinking he could outsmart me. Noah's lips curled into a slow, approving smile. Now that's the Alice I remember. For the next 2 hours, we went through every detail. I laid out my plan, and Noah filled in the gaps with what he knew about tracking financial fraud. We mapped out every step, freezing the sale, collecting more evidence, ensuring that when we made our move, Gavin wouldn't just lose my house. He'd lose everything. By the time I left the coffee shop, I felt lighter. Not because the situation was any less dire, but because I had a plan. A way to fight back. I spent the afternoon pulling records, making calls, setting things in motion. When Gavin came home that night, I greeted him with a kiss, smiling as if nothing had changed. He had no idea that the life he thought he controlled was slipping through his fingers. And I couldn't wait to watch him fall. The days that followed were a careful balance of patience and precision. I had spent years sharpening my SK*LLS in negotiation, analyzing contracts, and finding the smallest vulnerabilities that could collapse an entire case. Now, I was applying that expertise to my own life. Every morning, I played the part of the devoted fiancé, going through the motions of wedding preparations, answering texts from my bridesmaids, discussing seating arrangements with Gavin like everything was normal. And every evening, when he wasn't around, I worked with Noah, combing through financial records, real estate documents, and any piece of evidence that could bury Gavin completely. By the 3rd day, Noah had uncovered the offshore accounts in greater detail. There were more than just the one linked to the house sale. There were at least 3 accounts under shell corporations, all connected to Gavin. The money trail was murky, designed to be hard to trace, but not impossible. What stood out the most was that he wasn't just funneling money from our accounts, he was siphoning funds from other sources as well. Clients, possibly even his own firm. It was bigger than I had anticipated. I sat in my office that afternoon, staring at the printed copies of Gavin's transactions, feeling the weight of what I had discovered. If this had been a client's case, I would have already advised them to take it to the authorities. But this wasn't a client. This was the man I had been living with, the man I had planned to marry, the man who had wrapped his arms around me just last night and told me he loved me. I picked up my phone, scrolling through our messages from the past few days. There were texts from Gavin asking about the wedding venue, confirming the guest list, even teasing me about a surprise honeymoon destination he had planned. How had he been able to live this double life so seamlessly? Had there ever been a moment when he had felt guilty? Did he ever hesitate before signing my name on those documents, before shifting money behind my back? Noah had warned me not to let emotion get in the way, but it was hard not to feel the sting of betrayal. I had trusted him. I had built a future around him. And now I was dismantling everything piece by piece. A notification popped up on my phone, an email from the real estate agency handling the sale of my grandmother's house. I clicked it open, my heart hammering. The email was a confirmation. Final approval pending. Transfer expected to be completed within 3 business days. I swallowed hard, my grip tightening around the phone. 3 days. That was all the time I had left before the house was out of my name, before Gavin got his payday. I immediately dialed Noah. He picked up on the first ring. "Tell me you have good news." "We're running out of time," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "The sale is almost finalized. We need to act now." There was a pause. Then, "Meet me in an hour. I have something." I grabbed my keys and was out the door within minutes. Noah was already seated when I arrived, his laptop open in front of him. He didn't waste time with small talk. As soon as I sat down, he turned the screen toward me. "I found something that changes everything." I leaned in, scanning the document on the screen. At first, it looked like another transaction record, one of many we had been tracking. But then I saw the name attached to it. Owen King. "Gavin's been working with King longer than we thought," Noah explained. "This isn't just about your house. There are other properties, too, maybe 3, that he's pulled the same stunt with. It looks like a full-blown operation. King buys properties, Gavin provides the forged documents, and they flip them for profit." I felt my stomach turn. "Are you saying he's done this to other people?" Noah nodded grimly. "And we might not be the first to catch on. There's an open inquiry into King's business practices. The feds have been sniffing around his developments for months." I took a slow breath, forcing myself to process the information. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was criminal fraud on a much larger scale. If Gavin was caught, it wouldn't just mean losing his job or reputation, it could mean prison time. Noah must have seen the look on my face because he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Alice, this is the moment where you decide how far you want to take this. We can stop the sale of your house, cut ties, and walk away." Or, he let the sentence hang, letting me fill in the blanks. I looked at the screen again, at the numbers, the transfers, the undeniable proof of what Gavin had done. I had spent years building my career on the idea that justice had to be pursued, no matter how complicated or personal it got. I looked up at Noah. "I want to take everything from him." A slow smile spread across his face. "Then let's get to work." That night, I played the part of the oblivious fiancé one last time. I made dinner, I laughed at Gavin's stories, I let him hold me like nothing had changed. But beneath the surface, every moment was calculated. I waited until he fell asleep before slipping out of bed, quietly retrieving his phone from where he had left it on the nightstand. I had already memorized his passcode, he hadn't changed it in years. My fingers moved quickly, pulling up his emails, his messages, looking for anything we had missed. And then I found it. A conversation between him and King. "King, once the funds clear, we're moving forward with the next phase. Let me know when it's done. Gavin, by Friday. She won't suspect a thing." I exhaled slowly, forcing down the anger that threatened to boil over. He was talking about me. About the sale of my house. About stealing from me, right under my nose. I sent the messages to Noah, then carefully placed the phone back where I had found it. When I slipped back into bed, Gavin stirred slightly but didn't wake. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, knowing that this would be the last night we ever shared a bed. By tomorrow, the game would begin. And he would never see it coming. The next morning, I set the first part of my plan into motion. I contacted Judge Margaret Crawford, an old mentor of mine who had worked on real estate fraud cases before. I told her everything, every forged document, every fraudulent transfer, every offshore account. She listened without interrupting, then finally said, "This is bigger than just your house, Alice. You understand that, right?" "I do," I said firmly. "And I want to take it all down." She didn't hesitate. "Then let's make sure it sticks." Within hours, we had filed an emergency injunction to freeze the sale of my house, blocking any further transactions until an investigation could be completed. That was only the beginning. Noah contacted the federal agents who had been looking into King's developments, providing them with everything we had gathered. The evidence was airtight. And then I waited. That evening, Gavin came home as if nothing was wrong. He kissed me on the cheek, asked about my day, and poured himself a drink. He had no idea that everything he had built, every lie he had told, every dollar he had stolen was about to come crashing down. As he sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone, I watched him. Tomorrow, the walls would close in. Tomorrow, he would learn exactly who he had underestimated. The morning of Gavin's downfall started like any other. He left early, dressed in a navy suit that I had once loved on him, completely unaware that his world was already unraveling. I watched from the window as he backed his car out of the driveway, his mind likely occupied with whatever excuse he planned to use once the sale of my house was finalized. Maybe he thought he'd tell me over dinner, spinning some story about an investment opportunity or a financial setback. Maybe he thought I would believe him. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around my coffee mug, letting the silence settle. There was a strange calmness in knowing that the inevitable had already been set into motion. By now, the injunction had gone through. The sale of my house was frozen. The federal agents Noah had contacted had flagged the transaction, and the offshore account linked to Gavin's fraudulent dealings was being investigated. His carefully built deception was crumbling by the hour, and he had no idea. I picked up my phone and sent Noah a quick message. "Everything in place?" His reply came within seconds. "Ready when you are." I had spent years watching people fight legal battles over things they should have protected. I had promised myself I would never be one of them. And yet, here I was, waging my own private war against a man I had once believed was my future. I had one last thing to do before it all came crashing down. I got dressed carefully, choosing a sleek black dress that made me look as sharp as I felt. This wasn't a day for sentimentality. This was a day for control. By the time I arrived at Gavin's office, I had already gone over every possible scenario in my head. I walked through the lobby of Holt Financial Group with the confidence of someone who belonged there, ignoring the curious glances from the receptionists. I made my way to his office without stopping, pushing the door open without knocking. Gavin was behind his desk, mid-conversation on the phone, his expression shifting the moment he saw me. "Alice?" He covered the receiver with his hand, offering me a surprised smile. "What are you doing here, baby?" I shut the door behind me, locking it. "Hang up," I said, my voice quiet but firm. He blinked, clearly thrown off. Now. Something in my tone must have unsettled him because he hesitated only a second before muttering an excuse and ending the call. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "All right. What's going on?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, placing it on his desk. He glanced down at it, then back at me. "What is this?" "Open it." For a moment, he didn't move. And then, with a small exhale, he flipped the folder open. I watched his face carefully as he scanned the first few pages: bank records, fraudulent transfers, offshore accounts. His expression remained neutral, but his grip on the paper tightened. His eyes flicked up to mine. Alice, I don't know what you think. I leaned forward, cutting him off. You stole from me, Gavin. His jaw clenched. That's not. Do not lie to me, I said, voice low, deadly. I have everything. The bank records, the forged signatures, the email exchanges with Owen King. I know exactly what you've been doing. He inhaled sharply through his nose, the muscles in his neck tightening. Alice, I can explain. I tilted my head. Oh, please. I'd love to hear how you explain selling my childhood home behind my back. How you explain forging my name, funneling money through offshore accounts, setting up fake shell corporations. Explain it to me, Gavin. His silence was telling. He sat back, exhaling through his nose, eyes shifting to the door as if calculating his options. You're being dramatic, he said finally, voice measured. It's not what you think. I let out a short laugh. You know, I was almost hoping you'd be smart enough to confess. I picked up my phone and tapped the screen. A voice recorder app was open, showing the last 3 minutes of our conversation already recorded. Gavin's face finally lost its composure. You. I smiled. I'm a real estate attorney, Gavin. Did you really think I wouldn't cover my bases? He *T up from his chair, hands bracing against the desk. Alice, listen to me. If you do anything with that. I cut him off. What? You'll do what, Gavin? You'll ruin me? Take everything. I let my voice drop into something colder. You already tried that. His nostrils flared, panic flashing behind his eyes. We can fix this. I tilted my head, amused. There is no we anymore. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at me like he didn't recognize me. Like I wasn't the woman he had spent years building a life with. Then, his phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen, and I saw it happen. The precise moment when realization dawned. His face went pale. I didn't have to see the message to know what it said. The injunction had gone through. The sale was frozen. The investigation had *N. Everything he had worked toward was gone. His breathing turned shallow. His hands flexed against the desk. Alice, he said, voice lower now, almost pleading. If you do this, I lose everything. I stared at him for a long moment, then exhaled slowly, shaking my head. You already lost everything, I said simply. I turned on my heel, heading for the door. He didn't stop me. I didn't look back. By the time I stepped out of the building, Noah was waiting for me by my car, leaning casually against the hood. How'd it go? He asked. I exhaled. As expected. He nodded, pushing off the car. The feds are moving fast. He won't have time to run. I nodded, looking up at the sky. The weight on my chest felt lighter. It was over. The man I had almost married, the man I had trusted, had been nothing but a facade. But I had outmaneuvered him. And in the end, he had only outsmarted himself. I glanced at Noah, a slow smile forming. Come on, I said. I think I owe myself a drink. Noah chuckled, opening the car door for me. Now that's the Alice I remember. And just like that, I drove away from the wreckage Gavin had created, without looking back. The news broke within 24 hours. By the time I woke up the next morning, my phone was flooded with messages, some from mutual friends, others from colleagues, and a few from numbers I didn't recognize but could guess belonged to reporters sniffing around the story. Gavin Holt, financial consultant and once respected investment advisor, was officially under federal investigation. The company he worked for had already started distancing itself, issuing a vague statement about compliance reviews and internal audits. I sat in my kitchen, scrolling through the articles as I sipped my coffee. Most of the pieces were dry, just summaries of the fraud allegations, but a few had more detail. They mentioned his involvement with Owen King, the forged documents, the offshore accounts. Everything Noah and I had uncovered was now being dissected by the public. There was no coming back from this. I set my phone down, taking a slow breath. For the first time in days, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath, waiting for the next blow. The battle was over. Gavin had lost. A soft knock at my door pulled me from my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I already knew who it was. I opened the door to find Noah leaning against the frame, coffee in one hand, his eyes scanning my face. "Figured you'd be up early," he said. I stepped aside, letting him in. "Didn't sleep much." He set the coffee down on the counter, watching me carefully. "How are you feeling?" I thought about it. The last few days had been a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, determination. But now, in the quiet aftermath, all I felt was relief. "I'm okay," I said honestly. Noah nodded like he had expected that answer. He gestured to my phone. "The articles are brutal. Holt Financial is pretending they had no idea what he was up to, but the higher-ups had to have known something. They'll throw him under the bus to save themselves," I said. "And he'll have no one left to protect him." Noah smirked. "Poetic, really." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a flash drive, placing it on the counter. "This is everything we collected. You might not need it now, but I figured you'd want a copy." I stared at it for a moment before picking it up. This tiny piece of plastic and metal held the evidence that had dismantled Gavin's entire life. "Thanks," I murmured. Noah hesitated, then leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "You know, most people would be drowning their sorrows right now. You just took down the man you were supposed to marry." I met his gaze. I didn't love who he really was. I loved who I thought he was. I let out a short breath. Turns out that person never existed. Noah studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Fair enough." I changed the subject before the weight of it all could settle too deeply. "What happens next?" "For Gavin?" Noah tilted his head. "Depends on what the feds dig up. Best case, he cuts a deal and gives them bigger fish to fry. Worst case, he goes away for a long time." I thought about the man I had once planned to spend my life with. I had imagined a future with him, holidays together, a home, maybe even children. And yet, all along, he had been imagining something very different. Noah pushed off the counter. "Come on," he said. "Let's get some air." We ended up at a small park a few blocks from my house. The morning air was crisp, the kind of sharpness that hinted at spring but still carried the bite of winter. We walked in comfortable silence, my hands shoved in my coat pockets, Noah keeping pace beside me. At one point, he glanced at me sideways. "You ever think about what you would have done if you hadn't caught him in time?" I considered the question. I used to think I would have married him. That I wouldn't have figured it out until it was too late. I let out a breath, watching it curl into the air. But I don't know. I think some part of me always knew something wasn't right. I just didn't want to see it. Noah nodded. People ignore red flags when they don't want to believe them. We walked a little longer, the sounds of the city waking up around us. I hadn't realized how much tension I had been holding in my body until now. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't bracing for the next move, the next discovery. Eventually, Noah broke the silence. "So, what now?" I smirked. "Now, I go back to work. I have clients who need me, a house I need to make sure stays in my name, and a life I'm going to rebuild exactly the way I want it." He looked amused. "No vacation? No dramatic escape to some beach where you drink expensive cocktails and swear off men forever?" I laughed, shaking my head. "Not my style." We reached a bench, and I sat down, stretching my legs in front of me. Noah sat beside me, watching the people pass by. "You know," he said after a moment, "I wasn't sure how this would end when you first called me. I thought maybe you'd want to just get your house back and move on quietly." He turned his head slightly, giving me a look. I should have known better. I grinned. "You really should have." He laughed, shaking his head. "So, is this where I say, 'I told you so' about Gavin?" I**T him a glare. "Don't push your luck." He held up his hands in surrender, still grinning. We sat there for a while, watching the world move around us. The sun had fully risen now, warming the air just enough to take the edge off the cold. After a while, I spoke again, my voice quieter. "I spent so much time thinking I had everything figured out, that I was good at seeing through people, at making the right choices." Noah didn't interrupt. He just let me talk. "And then this happened," I continued. "And I realized I wasn't as invincible as I thought." "You're not invincible," Noah said. "No one is. But you're damn good at fighting back." That made me smile. I looked at him. I don't know what I would have done without you. His expression softened slightly. You would have figured it out. I nodded, because maybe that was true. Maybe I would have. But it didn't change the fact that he had been there when I needed him the most. After a while, we got up and started walking again. As we left the park, I glanced at my phone one last time. Another news update about Gavin had popped up, but I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I had already won. The day Gavin was arrested, I didn't bother watching it happen. Noah had texted me that morning, letting me know that the feds had everything they needed. By noon, they had executed the warrant. Gavin had been taken from his office in handcuffs, his face frozen somewhere between shock and rage as cameras captured every second. His coworkers had pretended to be surprised, but I knew better. People like Gavin didn't commit fraud in isolation. There were others who had benefited, others who had looked the other way, others who had assumed they'd never get caught. They were next. But I wasn't there to see it unfold. I didn't need to be. Instead, I spent that morning at my grandmother's house. It had taken some legal maneuvering to unwind the damage Gavin had done, but in the end, the fraudulent sale had been voided. The house was still mine. I stood on the wraparound porch, running my fingers over the wooden railing, breathing in the crisp spring air. I had spent so many summers here as a child. I could still hear my grandmother's voice in the back of my mind, scolding me for climbing the old oak tree in the yard, laughing as she let me sneak an extra cookie from the kitchen. It had been more than just a house, it had been home. And Gavin had tried to take it from me. I felt no sadness about what had happened to him. Just satisfaction. A car pulled up to the curb, and I turned to see Noah stepping out. He had a folder in one hand, coffee in the other, because of course he did. You're supposed to be celebrating, he said as he walked up the steps, handing me the coffee. Not working. I took a sip, letting the warmth spread through me. This is my version of celebrating. Noah shook his head, setting the folder down on the porch railing. Well, in case you're curious, the fallout has been spectacular. Gavin's partners are pretending they had no idea what was going on, but the feds are already pulling financial records. Owen King is panicking. And Gavin, he smirked. Let's just say prison isn't going to be kind to him. I smiled. Good. Noah leaned against the railing, watching me. And what about you? What's next? I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the past few weeks settle. I rebuild. I keep working. I focus on what actually matters. Noah nodded. And love? Dating? Marriage? I laughed, shaking my head. Not anytime soon. He grinned. Smart choice. We stood there in silence for a while, watching the wind move through the trees. After everything, I had expected to feel different. I had expected some overwhelming wave of closure or peace, but all I felt was certainty. I had survived. I had won. And I was finally free.